Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Kenya's Supreme Court judges will be looking at the transparency of and technology used in this month's presidential election in attempting to answer 9 questions that will determine whether Deputy President William Ruto's victory stands. Also, the UN warns that the humanitarian situation in northern Ethiopia is alarming. Meanwhile, a UN ship loaded with 23,000 tons of Ukrainian grain finally arrives in Djibouti on its way to Ethiopia, where it's expected to feed around 1.5 million people for about a month. And a former Rwandan lawyer living in Nigeria wows design lovers from around the world with his self-taught furniture crafting skills. Lambert Shumbusho sculpts original pieces from wood found on the banks of local rivers and swamps. We take a closer look. But first, Kenya's Supreme Court has started working on the petition challenging the results of this month's presidential election. On Tuesday, it said that it had identified 9 key issues, including the question of whether irregularities were serious enough to overturn the poll. Former Prime Minister Raila Odinga has rejected the win of Deputy President William Ruto. Our correspondent in Nairobi, Vivian Wandera, tells us more.
Kenya's Apex Court, the Supreme Court, has ordered for a recount of votes in 15 polling stations across the country, essentially responding to one of the prayers in the presidential petition filed by Raila Odinga. Odinga in the petition says that the votes in these polling stations will help to prove that the election was rigged. The votes in these polling stations will be scrutinized and recounted, and a report will be filed at the court on the second day of the hearing, which is on Thursday by 2 p.m. During this process, political parties will be represented by 2 agents who might also be joined by the Registrar of the Judiciary and her staff. The Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has also been directed to give applicants access to its servers and other necessary material. The Chief Justice Martha Koome has also directed for the petitions to be conjoined into one as they all raise the same issues. Initially, there were 9 presidential petitions that were filed, but 2 were struck out, leaving out only 7. The Supreme Court, during the pre-trial conference that was held on Tuesday, identified 9 issues that were at the center of the presidential election petition, including to determine if the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission held the election in a constitutional manner. The court now has until September 5th to deliver a ruling.
Vivian Wandera there for us. Now, the UN has warned that the humanitarian situation in northern Ethiopia is alarming. The conflict in Tigray, which first began in late 2020, has cost thousands of lives since. Fighting between rebels and the federal government erupted again last week, with both sides blaming each other. TPLF fighters have reportedly since pushed about 50 kilometers south from Tigray into neighboring Amhara, sending more people fleeing. Now, the fighting has hastened the spectre of famine, which itself has been exacerbated by drought and food shortages caused by the war in Ukraine. On Tuesday, there was some slight sign of respite for the region as a UN ship loaded with 23,000 tons of Ukrainian grain finally arrived in Djibouti on its way to Ethiopia, where it's expected to feed about 1.5 million people for about a month. Laura Berstecker has more.
After a 2-week voyage, the brave commander has arrived in Djibouti. The vessel carrying 23,000 tons of grain departed mid-August from the Ukrainian port of Odessa and should provide much-needed relief to the drought-stricken Horn of Africa region.
The food on the brave commander will feed 1.5 million people for 1 month in Ethiopia. So this makes a very big impact for those people who currently have nothing.
The grain will now be transported from Djibouti to Ethiopia, where extreme weather, conflict, and surging food prices have left millions on the brink of famine. The United Nations on Monday warned again of a developing humanitarian crisis in the country, where fighting between government forces and Tigray rebels has raged for nearly 2 years.
The humanitarian situation in northern Ethiopia continues to be alarming. There are unconfirmed reports of displacements in frontline areas in Amhara and the Afar regions. We, of course, renew our call on the parties to the conflict to immediately facilitate the resumption of rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian workers and supplies into all of northern Ethiopia.
Last month, a UN-brokered deal saw Russia agree to open up 3 Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea in order to resume vital grain shipments. But while the arrival of the brave commander represents a first successful step, much more is needed to address growing hunger in Eastern Africa, where the World Food Programme estimates some 82 million people are currently in need of food aid.
Well, South Sudan has hit an important milestone in a 2018 peace deal meant to end years of brutal civil war. On Tuesday, thousands of fighters, some of whom were former rival rebels, became the first group to graduate together as part of a unified army. Around 400,000 people were killed in the 5 years of civil war in the run-up to the 2018 deal. The integration of forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and his rival, Vice President Riek Machar, was a key condition. Unified forces that are expected to graduate this year will work together in national security, police, and even wildlife services.
All the chapters of the agreement, the graduation of the unified forces under Chapter 2 has been the most challenging and yet the most important.
Police in Madagascar killed 19 people and injured 21 others after opening fire on crowds protesting over the kidnapping of an albino child. An armed rally of around 500 people reportedly tried to force their way into a police station in the town of Ikongo this week after the child was reportedly taken last week. Although several suspects were arrested, police say that some locals remained frustrated. Madagascar's defence minister visited Ikongo on Tuesday and has called for an investigation into the bloodshed. And Angola's UNITA opposition parties filed a complaint against the electoral victory of the ruling MPLA party and returning President João Lourenço for a second term. According to the Electoral Commission's results, the MPLA won with 51%, extending its 47-year rule. UNITA says, though, that according to its calculations, it should have won with 64% of the vote. If its written complaint is rejected, it can take the objection to the Constitutional Court, which must rule within 72 hours. Now, although endangered in Africa, populations of elephants in Zimbabwe are estimated to have hit around 100,000, the second highest in the world behind Botswana. And though the inhabitants of villages nearby say that that is far too many and that it's causing deadly elephant attacks, conservationists say that the numbers are something to be celebrated.
Here in this Zimbabwean village, it's time for the latest patrol, as there's a threat hiding behind the trees. According to government figures, it's estimated around 10 people here die every month due to elephant attacks, when herds of wild pachyderms approach villages and charge at locals.
It's terrible. The moment they come to the field, they destroy everything.
In the village, a funeral is beginning, with dancing to remember their recently fallen friend.
It was my brother. He continued to defend the elephants until the end.
Her brother, aged 30, died whilst farming in his fields on the riverbank after being trampled by an elephant. And locals say there's a competition brewing between them and the animals.
Human population is expanding, animal population is expanding, and we need to share the resource. And when we say our communities are competing for water with animals, this is what we are talking about.
Whilst most pachyderm populations remain endangered, Zimbabwe's elephant numbers have steadily risen by 5% each year. With figures estimated to be around 100,000, a quarter of the elephants in the whole of Africa live in Zimbabwe. Twice as many animals as there is space and resources.
We need to do some control measures, maybe by harvesting, selling them through sport hunting. The other way is maybe translocating them to other places.
It's forbidden to kill an elephant in Zimbabwe unless it attacks. National parks say the fight to create a human-to-wildlife balance continues.
And a former Rwandan lawyer living in Nigeria has wowed design lovers from around the world with his skillfully crafted furniture. Lambert Shumbusho sculpts original pieces from fallen tree trunks, unearthed roots, and hardwood he finds on the banks of rivers and in swamps. His self-taught skills attract international buyers. Our correspondents tell us more.
In his open-air workshop, Lambert Shumbusho has spent 5 years contemplating the potential of one particular tree stump. Its wood is not easy to manipulate, and his every cut must be precise and well thought out. The creation of luxury furniture requires a considered approach. Each completed piece can be sold for tens of thousands of euros.
I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with it. By looking at the wood all the time, I was inspired to make a table, which will be a living room table with quite exceptional shapes.
Lambert scouts for raw material in swamps. When he finds suitable tree trunks, he negotiates a price with locals. He first began his process 20 years ago whilst working as a business lawyer in the oil industry. He discovered the wood of the Iroko tree as he traveled through the Niger Delta.
This wood doesn't rot. It's been in the water for 200 or 300 years. It's in the swamps, where there's no oxygen. There we also have farmers with whom we have good relations, so nobody can touch the wood.
Lambert's work is unique and was on display in Paris at the recent International Biennale of Crafts and Creation. Until recently, the self-taught artist had been turning out 4 to 5 pieces a year. But demand has stepped up from across the world of furniture design. But Lambert hasn't totally turned his back on his old career.
I invested in my education. I went to the top schools like Harvard and others. So I can't just stop like that from one day to the next. I prefer to keep both. In fact, it's my identity.
Rwandan by birth and Nigerian by adoption, Lambert Shumbusho is a man of many faces, an adventurer who transforms swamp wood into unique and exceptional pieces for those who can afford them.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
On France 24, watch exclusive interviews with the world's most influential personalities.
We need to act together because we're protecting our freedom.
Encounters with key political leaders.
L'inquiétude, elle est extrême.
Leading figures from the worlds of culture, sport and science.
La science, la recherche, la découverte, le progrès, c'est important, c'est pas des mots qui sont vides.
Whatever you think is right, you can do.
Watch The Interview, a meeting of ideas on France 24 and France24.com.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.